Good evening. Welcome to Contemporary News. On this night, let's know the breaking news about global governance in the 21st century, effect of globalization to governments, traditional challenges, global economics, United Nations, NATO, WTO, NAFTA, and informationalism. And now, let's know the contemporary news from Jean May Rubico about global governance in the 21st century.
The global interstate system to contribute to peace and security by promoting international collaboration through educational, scientific, and cultural reforms in order to increase universal respect for justice, the rule of law, the human rights along with fundamental freedom. Global governance in the 21st century aims to open a number of new areas for further analysis and in particular to begin a process of cross-fertilization between different disciplines examining issues related to global governance. Effects of globalization to governments. According to the disciplining hypothesis, globalization retrains governments by inducing increased budgetary pressure. As a consequence, governments, their expenditures in favor of transfers and subsidies and away from capital expenditures.
Let's proceed to the global economics, global social movements by Ashley J. Yulit.
External intervention can generally be described as invasion by other countries. For example, when Saddam Hussein was the ruler of Iraq in 1990, he decided he was going to take over the oil fields of Kuwait. He invaded Kuwait and took it over. As a result, he was dislodged by an international coalition led by the United States. This day, we can see external intervention in other forms. Russia's external intervention into the affairs of Ukraine, a sovereign state in the post-Soviet era, is another instance of intervention in the anatomy of Russia. Intervenes in the affairs of people in Crimea who want to become part of Russia. Again, even thought they are part of Ukraine. Crimea declared its independence, Ukraine, and reaffiliated Russia. This is a case of how there might be a national identity within a country that is assisted by a neighboring country. Ukraine are guessed to have autonomy to determine the case for Crimea. As a result, there is a current conflict between Ukraine not recognizing sovereignty and Russia not recognizing Ukraine's sovereignty over Crimea. Internal political challenges can also happen. For example, after the Arab Spring in Egypt, a new constitution was created and a government was elected. Society that include religious diversity. The military staged a coup that deposed the government in order to restore stability. Other examples include the Taliban's efforts to control the government of Afghanistan. In Syria, the regional rebellion against Assad came from the country owns eternal dissenter who wanted to replace the government even though they were also Syrian national. The next challenges are part of a national identity or movement. It is important to know that a nation has cultural identity that people attach to, while a state is a definite entity due to its specific boundaries, however different. People with different identities can live in different states. For example, the courts resides in several different countries, including Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. The Catalans live primarily in Spain, but we can also find some of them in France. Scottish nationalism is another example that challenges the traditional notion of state sovereignty. In 2014, Great Britain had a vote in Scotland to decide whether Scotland was going to become its own autonomous state apart from the Great now, as compared to more than 2 decades years ago. Global movements such as the Al-Qaeda and ISIS are another example of national identity movements. In this case, they are structured around the fundamentalist version of Islam. Thank you.
The Relevance of the State Amid Globalization by Jepoy Angeles.
Good day everyone, my topic is all about the relevance of the state amid globalization. Globalization also creates a sense of interdependence among nations, which could create an imbalance of power among nations of different economic strength. The role of the nation-state in global world is largely a regulatory one as the chief factor in global interdependence. The role of the nation-state in globalization is a complex one in part due to the varying definition and shifting concept of globalization. While it has been defined in many ways, globalization is generally recognized as the fading or complete disappearance of economic, social, and cultural borders between nation-states. Some scholars have theorized that nation-states, which are inherently divided by physical and economic boundaries, will be less relevant in a globalized world, while increasing reduced barriers regarding international commerce and communication are sometimes seen as a potential threat to nation-state. These trends have existed throughout history. Air and sea transportation that made same-day travel to other continents possible and greatly expanded trade among countries did not abolish the sovereignty of individual nations. Instead, globalization is a force that changed the way nation-states deal with one another, particularly in the area of international commerce. Ang role ng mga bansa in terms of economics and governance ay malaking impact sa globalisasyon. May times nga lang na nagiging di-balance kasi may bansang bumibili ng product sa isang bansa pero yung isang bansang yun ay walang kailangan sa bansang bumili sa kanila. Nababago ng globalisasyon ang mga pangkalakalan sa iba't ibang bansa. Ano ang mga naidulot ng globalisasyon sa iba't ibang bansa? Tulad na ang globalisasyon ay isang pwersa na nagbago sa pakikitungo ng mga bansang estado sa isa't isa, na ang particular sa larangan ng mga pang-international commerce ay yung mga kalakalan nila sa bansa. Globalization is favors westernization. One commonly recognized effect of globalization is that it favors westernization, meaning that other nation-states are at disadvantage when dealing with the Americas and Europe. This is particularly true in the agricultural industry, in which second and third world nations face competition from Western companies. Another potential effect is that nation-states are forced to examine their economic policies in light of the many challenges and opportunities the multinational corporations and other entities of international commerce present. So, maapektuhan ng globalization ang ekonomi ng lahat ng bansa, lalo na yung mga bansa na hindi kasali sa Western companies, kasi siguro mas malaki at mas marami yung opportunities na mapapapunta sa mga bansa sa Western or yung American at European, kasi tingin ko mas tinatangkilik ng mga tao yung produkto nila. Tapos, dahil din sa globalization, na mas pabor nga sa westernization o sa western companies, parang nalulugi yung other countries kasi nakukumpetensya sila ng mga western companies. Tapos, isa pang epekto ng globalization, napipilitan ang mga state at nation na i-examine o aralin ang mga economic policies nila dahil maraming challenge at opportunities and naibigay ng mga multinational corporation at international commerce.
Let's move to the Global Economics, Global Social Movement by John Mark Cabangon.
The report about global economics. The third major source of challenge comes from global economics. The global economy demands the states of comfort through the rules of free market capitalism. Government austerity comes from developments of organizations that cooperate across countries, such as WTO and the regional agreements, such as NAFTA and the European Union and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN. Ito daw po yung pumapangatlo sa pangunahing mapagkukunan ng pandaigdigang ekonomiya. At sinasabi din po dito, ang pagkamahigpit ng pamahalaan ay nagmumula sa mga pagpapaunlad ng mga samahan na naipagtulungan sa buong bansa. At kasama na po dyan ang tulad ng WTO at mga panrehiyong kasunduan. Kasama po dyan ng NAFTA, European Union or EU, Association sa Timog Silangang Asya. Neoliberal economics or neoliberal capitalism started in the 1980s. It focuses on the free trade and dismantling trade barriers. It made sure that governments did not impose restrictive regulations on corporate presence, as well as on the free flow of capital and jobs. Free trade was seen as the ideal or the normative belief that is the best economy is one where there is free trade everywhere. Neoliberal economics requires a state of cooperate in the global market through the free flow of capital, the privatization of services, and fiscal austerity or constraint. Sinasabi po dito na noong 1980s nagsimula itong neoliberal economies at nakatuon po ito sa libreng kalakalan at pagtatanggal ng mga nakahadlang sa kalakalan. Tsaka sinasabi din po dito na kaugnay nito ang papel na ginagampanan ng gobyerno ay nabawasan dahil nauugnay ito sa merkado. Ang kasunod pa, specific example to expand global economic influence is the use of IMF and the World Bank enforcing government reforms to poorer country. Kumbaga po ay sila po yung nagpupursige sa ibang gobyerno para mapaunlad yung ibang mahihirap na bansa. Furthermore, the regional economic development effort focuses on expanding free trade and market liberalization. Kumbaga po, ayan ang nangyayari. Ang gobyerno na po ang nag-effort para mapalawak o mapalago ang free trade ng bawat market. At this corporation will sell the products in developing countries. This exacerbates rising inequality in the world. Greece is one example that explains how neoliberal economics can threaten the sovereignty of a state. Kumbaga po ay kasama pala po ang Greece at naging isang example kung paano ipaliwanag yung neoliberal economics. Tsaka sinabi din po dito na As a larger alliance, the EU broke down all kinds of barriers among its member states including Greece, tulad po ng passport, visas, and license plates. It allowed people to travel across European borders and encourage economic cooperation and collaborate of member states. 20 years later, Greece adopted the euro as its own currency and got rid of the drachma. Next po ay what is global social movements? Global social movements are defined as mobilization of masses across countries aimed to engaging with multinational corporations or political elites. They archive change by dialogue or protest against social injustice perpetrated by political elites or international organizations. At dito naman po sa global social movements, kumbaga po for example, human rights. Human rights movements create public sentiment, value, or agenda. Kumbaga po nagkakaroon sila ng isang pagpupulong or agenda para may pahiwatig nila kung ano yung gusto nilang sabihin sa isang namumuno. Yun lang po. Salamat.
Let's proceed to the non-government organization Global Economic Association by Melissa Mercado.
Non-governmental organization or mas kilala sa tawag na NGOs. Another example of an international Another example of an organization that was developed out of war is the Red Cross. Red Crescent in Muslim countries. It is considered as a non-governmental organization. NGOs are not tied to any country. This allows them to operate freely throughout the world. They provide emergency relief such as food, water, and medical supplies for those whose homes or towns have been destroyed by disaster or war. They also monitor the treatment of prisoners of wars and go to conflicts to make sure that no war crimes are taking place. In fact, the Red Cross began as an organization to help those who were wounded during wars. The big Red Cross by NGOs is the identifications that they are not soldiers. Part of why it is important for the Red Cross to be an NGO is that they remain neutral and would help the wounded from both sides of war. Since they are neutral, governments are more likely to let them come in their countries to help. While the headquarters of the International Red Cross is in Geneva, Switzerland, they have branches all around the world. In addition to the Red Cross, there are many NGOs dedicated to helping people around the world. Doctors Without Borders provides pre-emergency healthcare in disaster areas. Oxfam fights famine and disease. Amnesty International speak out for human rights and political prisoners. And Save the Children help kids get healthcare and education. Global Economic Association, the WTO and NAFTA. The next group is an economic association, WTO. It is made up of 162 countries around the world and was created with the goal of increasing free trade. Countries, therefore, can buy and sell goods from one another without placing taxes on imports or tariffs. In addition, tariffs are used to protect businesses and companies inside their country. Through God and nature, WTO is not without criticism. In fact, a protest in Seattle at a 1999 WTO conference led to a major riot as some said that WTO was more about helping large companies and corporations than it was about helping people. Another famous economic organization is NAFTA. This is an economic treaty between the United States, Canada, and Mexico in which the three countries trade freely without taxing each other. NAFTA is not without critics either. Some American auto workers protested against NAFTA as several car companies moved their factories to Mexico in search for cheaper labor. NAFTA, like WTO, represents the challenge in America of keeping manufacturing factories.
Peace Treaties and Military Alliances by Arlene Bumbita. United States. Global politics entails relationship of countries and different governments and non-governmental organizations. The term United States was coined by the former President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1942 in the U.S. It is one of the leading political organizations in the world. The operation began on October 24, 1945. Generally, it functioned in four areas: military issues, economic issues, environmental issues, and human protection. The headquarters of the UN was in New York City. Maintaining peace and building relationships is number one goal of the UN. Maintaining international peace and security became the essential mission of the UN after World War of this day. 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council are the US, Britain, Russia, China, and France. The UN is not all about fights. It has a program called UNICEF, or the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund. The goal of this program is to help children. Let's move on the Globalization and Globalism by Rhea May Magsumbol.
Globalization and globalism. What then is globalism? Globalism refers to the network of connection that transcends distance of different countries in the world. Ang globalismo ay nagdudugtong o nagbibigay daan upang magkaroon ng koneksyon ang mga bansa patungo sa isa't isa. Masasabing mas mapapadali ng globalismo ang pakikipag-ugnayan ng mga tao at bansa. Samantalang, ang tinutukoy naman ng globalisasyon ay ang kung gaano kabilis nakapag-uugnayan ang bawat bansa. If we are to make a stark contrast between globalization and globalism by saying that globalization means connectedness while globalism is not. Nagkakaroon ng pagkalito sa pagitan ng nakaraan at kasalukuyan dahil sa tingin nila ngayon lamang nagkaroon ng ugnayan ng bawat isa. Ngunit noon pa man, bago nagka-industrial revolution ay nagkakaugnay na ang mga bansa. We can also differentiate globalism and globalization in terms of its distinctness. Na ipagkukumpara natin ang globalisasyon at globalismo batay sa distinctness o kapal nito. Ang globalismo ay habang lumalaki ito, nagiging globalisasyon na ito. Ibig sabihin, sa pamamagitan ng globalisasyon, nagkakaroon ng koneksyon ng bawat isa. This is where globalization comes in. If we look at the global trade today, it has reached a greater number of people around the world. Halimbawa ay ang pagbebenta through online dahil sa lumalawak na ang sakop ng market at abot ng produkto. The last dimension, social and cultural globalism, involves movement of ideas, information, image, and people who carry ideas, information with them. For instance, religious ideas have spread throughout the world and greater scope and speed. Religious teaching are delivered today through the mass media, such as television, radio, and the internet. Unlike before, religious leaders had to walk off by foot and had to deliver their message in a face-to-face manner.
And now, let's know the contemporary news about global citizenship by Baby Jane Sampson.
Global citizenship first emerged in 4th century BCE among the Greek cynics who coined the term cosmopolitan. What is global citizenship? It is the way of living that recognizes our world and increasingly complex web connections and interdependence. One in which our choices and action may have repercussions for people and communities locally, nationally, or internationally. What is the importance of global citizenship? It is all about encouraging young people to develop the knowledge, skills, and values they need to engage with the world. Global citizenship nurtures personal respect and respect for others. Wherever they live, it encourages individuals to think deeply and critically about what is equitable and just, and what will minimize harm to our planet. How global citizenship affects to our world? Global citizenship helps young people to build their own understanding of world events, think about their values and what's important to them. 4 main parts of global citizenship. First, civic responsibilities. Second, cultural awareness. Third, environment. And fourth, global economy.
Thank you and stay safe.